Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. I'm Yuki Miyamoto, the director of DePaul Humanities Center. And I am delighted tonight that we can resume this tradition of the DePaul Humanities Center's Humanities Laureate Award ceremony in person, celebrating together with all of you. Because of the pandemic, we have experienced halting and/or altering activities in our lives. Ironically, while the pandemic has taken many lives, it has also shown us, for example, translucent, clear water in Venice that resulted from the absence of tourist traffic in the wake of Italy's lockdowns. This makes us wonder if nature and humans can ever coexist without destroying each other. We have abused and exploited nature, even though our lives depend heavily on nature. Or more accurately, although nature could terminate our lives, without nature, it is impossible for us to sustain our lives. Given this fact, the humanities should not only be concerned about humans, but also about the environment that allows us to sustain our lives and our civilizations. Can our civilizations, technology and science included, save us from destruction or further damage to our environment? Do we not need new narratives and cosmologies to envision for our future a more equal and sustainable world? Or should we leave it to AI to craft stories? Foreshadowing our 2023-2024 theme, Human and Nature, the DePaul Humanities Center is honored to present our annual Laureate Award to China's esteemed prize-winning writer, Stanley Qiufan CHEN, as this year's Humanities Laureate. The pandemic is not yet over, and some scientists have already warned us to prepare for the next pandemic. I have no idea what the next one will look like, or what our future will look like. However, I'm enthralled to encounter stories emerging from the imagination of those who can execute writing the future, such as Mr. Chen. Presenting our award tonight is Dr. John Shanahan, Associate Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, Professor of English at DePaul University, and a former Humanities Center Fellow. He will be one of the interlocutors this evening, together with Dr. Tara Betts. His research, Dr. Shanahan's research interests include 17th and 18th century English literature, the history of science and technology, science fiction, and digital humanities. He contributed to the English translation of the Wandering Earth Film Production Handbook, a book-length account of China's highest-grossing sci-fi film, and has an article forthcoming on Liu Cixin's award-winning sci-fi trilogy, The Three-Body Problem. I also learned that Dr. Shanahan met Mr. Chen in China some years ago, and I cannot think of a better person to present the award to prize-winning science fiction writer Stanley Qiufan CHEN. Can we welcome them onto the stage?
Hi, everyone. So welcome, and it's my honor to introduce tonight's speaker, distinguished author Chen Qiufan, aka Stanley Qiufan, the DePaul Humanities Center's 2022-2023 laureate. First, I want to thank the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences for sponsoring this event and to acknowledge the hard work of Professor Miyamoto, Anna Clissold, and the Humanities Center for planning and footwork behind the scenes. If you follow science fiction, you will have seen the superlative praise surrounding the work of tonight's speaker, Chen Qiufan. To cite just a few examples, Wired magazine in 2021, quote, sci-fi writer or prophet, the hyper-real life of Chen Qiufan. Or Financial Times a few years ago, Chen Qiufan is a, quote, cult writer pushing the boundaries of sci-fi, unquote. Or Quartz magazine in 2018, China's William Gibson is a sci-fi writer wrestling with problems from pollution to patriarchy. You have a lot to do. His writings have won 3 Galaxy Awards for Chinese science fiction, 12 Nebula Awards for science fiction and fantasy. His 2013 novel Waste Tide won the Chinese Nebula Award, the highest annual honor. His short stories have been published in fantasy and science fiction, MIT Technology Review, Clark's World, Year's Best Sci-Fi, Interzone and Lightspeed, as well as in the influential Chinese science fiction magazine, Science Fiction World. His works have been translated into almost a dozen languages, at least by my last count. Let me say a little bit of background to Mr. Chen. Chen was born in Shantou, Guangdong province, in southern China, and earned degrees in literature and fine arts at renowned Peking University in Beijing, Beida, and further graduate work at Hong Kong University and Tsinghua University. He went on to search engine companies Baidu and Google China while writing science fiction in his spare time. In recent years, finding such success in his cyberpunk and nonfiction commentary, he's moved on to full-time writing while also serving as a consultant in a variety of fields. He's been a guest artist at CERN, the European Nuclear Research Consortium. He's delivered TED Talks with viewership in the millions, and is honorary president of the Chinese Science Fiction Writers Association. He served as a culture leader at the World Economic Forum, an Asia 21 Society Young Leader, and has a seat on the X Prize Foundation Science Fiction Advisory Council. Again, I don't know how you do all this all the time. Recently, with computer scientist and former head of Google China, Kai-Fu Lee, he has co-authored the book AI 2041, 10 Visions for Our Future, which describes multiple scenarios for AI in the coming years. I was going to say he currently lives in Shanghai, but he's in many places. He was kind enough to meet our DePaul Study Abroad class in 2018 when we were in Shanghai. So thank you for having dinner with the students. That was great. And I'll say, I'll keep it brief, but I want to say a few more things about the fiction itself. Mr. Chen has written a number of notable short stories, a format that's so influential and synonymous with the history of science fiction in the US and around the world. His short fiction has been collected in too many short story collections to detail tonight, so I'll just mention 2 in English that have found a larger audience. 2016's Invisible Planets and 2019's Broken Stars, both volumes edited and translated by Ken Liu. Always working a few years ahead of the rest of us. In 2018-19, Mr. Chen had already written about experiments in writing with AI programs and text generators, right, like ChatGPT and things that are in the news right now. For example, in his 2019 essay, Life Algorithm. And yet, despite his seeming ease in writing about the future, I want to note that Chen Qiufan has significant insight into the epochal changes in China during his lifetime and relentlessly on our near-term future paths. The past 4 decades in China represent a scale and pace of technological and socio-political change that is without equal. And I won't rehearse the numbers and examples to this learned crowd. It does give some truth to the idea that science fiction may be the only adequate genre to represent it. Science fiction is the realism of our times, as many people debate now. Chen Qiufan is a perfect guide for us in that idea. In his much discussed essay about science fiction in China and his place in it, The Torn Generation, Mr. Chen writes, quote, faced with the absurd reality of contemporary China, the writer cannot fully explore or express the possibilities of extreme beauty and extreme ugliness without resorting to science fiction, unquote. His novel Waste Tide captures climate crisis and e-waste recycling, the peculiar kind of slow violence, to use Rob Nixon's term, that dominated southern Chinese cities at the beginning of this century and continues to impact the people and environment even as the amount of e-waste from abroad has slowed. Chen's work has always had a critical, ethical focus. He noted a few years ago, describing himself, quote, "I'm a problem-oriented writer. I want to explore problems in real life, ones brought to us by technology development," unquote. Greater Guangdong province, home to countless villages that specialize in reclaiming metals out of old circuit boards, stripping copper from wires, separating different plastics, while burning whatever could be burned, is the flip side of the gee-whiz small drones pioneered in Shenzhen and the addictive consumer apps coming out of Beijing, Shanghai, and Hangzhou. So finally, let me mention Chen Qiufan's 2015 short story, The Coming of the Light, Kai Guang. To me, one of the best science fiction stories in any language written in the last decade. My students last quarter, I see some of them here, read it. We spent a good deal of class time working through its twists and turns. Briefly, it tells of an iPhone app put to unexpected uses, the culture of online disinformation, the heat death of the universe, apocalypse, and Buddhist notions of emptiness, all tied together as reflections of one another in 25 pages. This intellectual exhilaration is why so many of us are science fiction fans and Chen Qiufan fans. So please help me thank Chen Qiufan for coming to DePaul to speak to us tonight. And it's my honor to present him the Laureate Award.
Thank you everyone for coming in this unusually warm weather in Chicago. So it's almost like advocating the authenticity of climate change to everyone, right? Also, thanks for having me here. Humble and grateful to receive the Humanities Laureate Award. So as a Chinese science fiction writer, I often journey among different boundless expanses of imagination, like where the stars of creativity form constellation of narratives and metaphors. So today I'd like to embark upon a different kind of voyage with you, like one that navigates the confluence of environmental issues such as e-waste, climate change, carbon emission, etc. But first of all, let me extend my deepest gratitude to those who make this moment possible, like Yuki, Sarah, Joe, and everyone, Anna, of course. So thank you all. All right, let me start with Waste Tide. So of course, I wrote it 10 years ago. Actually, it got published in Chinese, and it spent some time to get into some other languages. Right now, I have like over a dozen of different language editions around the world. So it also getting some recognition and awards as well. But most importantly is how I witness the whole dynamic exchange around the world. So because back then when I wrote the story, and actually nobody really understand why you want to write a science fiction about waste, especially in China. So I have to go back to the backstories, why I decided to write the story, and what is the real story behind the scene. So like all the stories in China, it always happen on the mill, right? So back in 2011, when I visited my hometown, Shantou, a small town like with 3 million population in Guangdong province, and I had a dinner with my childhood friend, one of those who used to work for American recycling company, and he told me there is a place called Guiyu. In Chinese, it means precious island. It's not that far from my hometown city. It's only 60 kilometers by car, but I never heard of this place. And he told me that was the center of electronic waste recycling all over the world. So I kind of like, as a writer, you have this kind of sensitivity, you smell it, oh, maybe this is an interesting place, you need to check it out. So, and maybe that could be like developed into a story. So I went to the place, and this is what it looked like back in the day. So you can see all these circuits, motherboards, cables, broken monitors, everything, like mountainous stacking in the place and awaiting to be assembling with acid, with chemicals, with bare hands and nose. And this is the kids, like the immigrant children. They're moving to town from like less developed part of China, mostly from the west south part of China, and they make a living there. And the whole place even is so dystopic to us, but it's the Disneyland for those kids. So they play around with these cables, circuits, motherboards, and not to mention the e-waste workers. So because there are several like anthropology research paper upon the case, and basically they use their bare hand to disassembling everything, and they even use their nose to smell with burning all this kind of different materials to distinguish which is which. So it's almost like a post-human condition to me. And if you think this is like out of the story, you might get it wrong. This is only a small piece of the global issue. So I started to dig deeper into the electronic waste problem. And surprisingly, so this is something called not in my backyard principle. So everyone here might already heard of this term. So I would say like most of the electronic waste, what I saw in Guiyu was actually shift from developed countries such as US or EU, the most developed countries in the world. And only like very small portion of those get like legally labeled and tracked, maybe less than 20%. And the rest of those were actually by smuggling. So this is not only happening in China, but also like Southeast Asia, Africa, India, etc., etc. So it's a huge, huge industry. And like, but the dynamic, of course, is changing. Like after my book got published 3 years later, the Chinese government, they launched the policy like to ban 24 types of foreign waste, so including electronic waste. But if China no longer take on the stack, so who else could be the backyard? The answer is like it pushes further, right? So this is what we saw, like in Philippines, there's huge protest against the imported waste from Canada. And also, I met some activists around the area, like from Thai, from Malaysia, so that they actually group up like some kind of like allies. So they try to put together the resources, the intelligence to fight against the imported waste from developed countries. So this is a war, like between different part of the geopolitical imbalance. So I think people always ask me why you want to put it in the format of science fiction, not nonfiction, right? So because I think I thought through carefully because, of course, one, science fiction is always my thing. I started to watch Star Wars, Star Trek since I was in the kindergarten. So I'm always a Trekkie. Live long and prosper. And secondly, I think science fiction has its unique ethic. And also it has this kind of flexibility to help you think beyond here and now. So it's not only about China, but it's about everyone suffer from this global issue around the world. And it also helps you to think beyond space and time, even beyond human, because I'm gonna tell you more about the story itself, like how I use like 3 layers of metaphors, like e-waste and the waste island and waste people to elaborate the issue and help people from different places to relate to the story and to resonate with the story. So because I got a lot of feedback, most of the feedback was from the developed countries such as Southern Africa, from India. And one of the most interesting letter I got is from actually Bakersfield in California. So because like the reader told me that might be the most polluted town among the whole US. I'm not sure if that's real, but yeah, but the letter was really touching because is that what you described made me to reflect on my behavior, on my daily life, and he decided not to consume more electronic gadgets anymore, or to treat it like in a better way. So to get after it got retired, so we can see like this kind of e-waste, actually climate destruction is driven by humanity's dependence on electronic gadgets. So generating a growing wave of e-waste that pollute the earth. So if processing cities emerged on former agricultural islands after developed economies banned the e-waste processing. So the company I made up, like, it's called TerraGreen. So it's a cynical name. So it uses AI algorithm, neurotechnology, and psychotropic drugs to manipulate consumers' desire, promoting all this consumption as a new opiate of the masses, and perpetuating the toxic cycle to damaging the planet. And the island actually is also an iconic representation of the imbalance of right now what we're living in the world. So I use American, I criticize the American, but not only American, I also criticizing the local government as well. So you can see every interest party, they have their legitimacy to make the decision what they've been doing, but like conversely, they create so-called slow violence and damages not only to the people, but also to the environment, to our planet. And of course, last but not the least, the waste people who suffer the most from the whole cycle. So while the free spending consumers around the world immerse themselves in the metaverse using the latest model toys that are the fruits of the waste people labor, the waste people has to contain themselves with whatever cast off, outdated phones, computers, and internet-enabled prosthetics they can salvage. Not only do these items tend to leak toxic chemicals, they're often carriers of cyber virus that infect the mind as they deliver addictive hits of pain, anger, pleasure, and ecstasy to their users. So the protagonist, the waste girl, so she's the one who suffered everything, and she got infected by the cyber virus, and she transformed to a cyborg, which become a goddess. So from a female slave, and she became a warrior and later a goddess to evoke the revolution, to guide the people, to lead the people, to fight against the system. So I think this is the most interesting part when I'm writing the story, because I didn't really know where it's heading to. So when I get to the point, okay, the girl has to die and reborn and resurrection. So almost like Jesus, right? And she became something more than human, and she will take the lead. And this is something I can see right now, maybe in the near future might become some reality. So I think the story is telling us, when you think about not in my backyard, so basically it's a pseudo statement, because when you throw it away, it gets back to you ultimately, because there is one only Earth, one only mother planet we're living in, so there is no way. So next time when you throw it away, think again. And imagine if you will, we are all like frogs in a slowly boiling pots of water, right? So the temperature rises incrementally, like almost in per century, until one day we find ourselves cooked, right? So this metaphor, morbid as it might be, so speak to the environmental crisis we're facing today. So as the pot continues to simmer, we, the frogs, must ask ourselves, how can we leap towards a more sustainable or cooler future? And how can our technology, our society, our culture guide us through the heat? So my answer could be stories, but not the conventional stories we used to be, but the new kind of stories. And this is the stories I collaborate with Dr. Kai-Fu Lee before and during the pandemic. It's actually talking about AI, but also about climate. So we set up like 10 stories in 10 different cities around the world. It's all about AI implication in different areas, such as education, aging society, autonomous weapon, autonomous vehicle, even like entertainment and job displacement. So we have different cultures, we have different characters, we have different language, and yeah, right now we have over 20 language editions around the world. So, and also we're discussing with some studios like Hollywood studios and streamers to make it into a movie or TV series. So you can like make huge impact to the people. And there are two stories that actually tap into the topic where we're discussing today. One is quantum genocide. It's talking about a math scientist who's doing quantum physics. The family actually got killed in a mountain fire in California, which we all know is kind of extreme, like before and at the present, and maybe it will be in the future. So the scientist goes mad, And he used AI technologies such as drones and autonomous weapons, and actually it's one man's band, but he's kind of like cutting off. He intended to cut off the whole internet and try to put people backward before the age of internet. So this is against the accelerationist. So I think with this story, what I try to say is everything is so deeply and intertwining and interconnected with each other. So all this kind of factor is actually a small piece of the whole landscape. So we have to look at it closely, but we also need to step back to see the bigger picture. And then we can find a solution. And another more, a little bit more brighter and positive story is entitled Dreaming of Plenitude. It's talking about in Australia. So most of my Australian friends, they really don't buy in the story because they say, oh, no way, the Australian government never gonna achieve this. Because what I'm being talking about is how would the society reach a post-scarcity status? Like basically he's talking about abundance of clean energy, and people doesn't need to work, and you can get a basic income to satisfy all your basic needs. But how can we incentive and mobilize people for their higher hierarchy of self-actualization, just like Maslow's theory, right? So we actually we imagine a new kind of currency, just like the digital currency. But the currency is not about possessing the fortune. It's not about like making you climb up the ladder in the society by how much money you own, but like we evaluate your personal value by your contribution to the society, to the community, like your loving, your belonging, your self-actualization, and everything. So I think it's a little bit Star Trek-ish, you know, it's kind of utopian, it's kind of too optimistic, but I think this is something we need to get through. It's not always about the technology. It's also about the political system we build up around the technology. So I think under the current circumstance of capitalism, there's no way we can get rid of this that loop, because it's all about like maximize the profit. It's all about like expand your business. It's all about acceleration. So I always want to go back to one of my favorite Chinese ancient philosopher, Lao Tzu, in his Dao De Jing, so Taoism. So it's always talking about balance and harmony. So it's not always craving for more, but think about like how we can live in a harmonious status with the others and also the nature. So this is another book for kids. So it's like, its title is Net Zero Game. So basically, it's a very fairy tale-ish story about how a kid time traveling to 2060 to experience everything in a carbon neutral society, and how people using technology and new kind of system and even the culture to incentive and to mobilize people to make the change. Because I think the younger generation, those who were born after now, they are the one generation who will experience the whole process towards carbon neutrality, right? So we have to help them to understand what is the relationship between carbon neutrality, with climate change, and even biodiversity. So if they couldn't understand what is really going on, how can we count on them to make the change? So this is the book got published last year in China, and some school actually using it as a textbook to help people to understand what is going on, what is the technology, what is the real science behind the scene. I think like the book, the stories I mentioned about, it's like we can use a term to categorize it. It's called sci-fi or climate fiction. So because Amitav Ghosh, in his great book, The Great Derangement, he argued that the modern Western novel has failed to address the urgent environmental crisis. And this is because of the dominant cultural and economic system that prioritize individualism and consumerism over collective action and sustainability. So I think sci-fi or climate fiction is a genre that explores the potential consequences of anthropogenic climate change on human society and the environment. So it becomes an increasingly popular and relevant form of storytelling in recent decades because of the intensification of global warming and the public awareness of its implication. So we can see like there are several like very important approaches towards to address this climate change, like in different ways, right? So dystopian, post-apocalyptic storytellings, like The Road, one of my favorite novel by Cormac McCarthy, is actually portraying a bleak, like very dark kind of future. And with this kind of cautionary tale, it emphasized the urgency of addressing climate change before it's getting too late. And second is kind of near future climate, sci-fi. So it explored the immediate consequences of climate change, such as Barbara Kingsolver's fly behavior. It started with the abnormal behavior change of the butterflies in the backyard. So this is something more engaging with the ordinary readers. And of course, what we need the most, in my opinion, optimistic sci-fi. So for example, Stanley Robinson, the Ministry for the Future. So this kind of narratives presents more hopeful visions of humanity's ability to adapt to or mitigate climate change. So they often emphasize the role of science, technology, and collective action in addressing the environmental challenges. So, but that's not enough. So, because the consequences of climate change is getting more apparent and pressing. So it will continue to getting worse and worse. So also the sci-fi, it needs to evolve in response to the shifting socio-political landscape. So the genre or the subgenre's future might be characterized by several developments, such as we need greater diversity in perspective, because it's increasingly encompasses stories from diverse cultural and geopolitical background, and particularly those from regions most affected by climate change, so-called MAPA, so most affected population and area. And of course, this kind of like global south, they suffer the most when they contribute the least on carbon emission. So this kind of historical inequality is always there and is always being argued and discussed among the huge and important conference. And this will lead to a richer and more nuanced understanding of the global impact of climate change and the various ways in which communities adapt and respond. And second, of course, we need interdisciplinary approaches. We need to connect, such as science, technology, politics, anthropologists, sociologists, humanities. This kind of like interdisciplinary nature will enable the genre to explore the complex and interconnected aspects of climate change and its implication for human societies. And third is, like, as the urgency to address human climate change intensifies, sci-fi might increasingly improvise potential solutions and strategies for mitigation and adaptation. This could lead to a rise in utopian or solar punk. So this is a new kind of subgenre narrative that highlights the power of human ingenuity and cooperation in overcoming the environmental challenges. And last but not the least, of course, sci-fi will likely become more prevalent in mainstream literature, film, TV, drama, etc., as the impact of climate change become more apparent and public concern increases. This kind of increased visibility could further raise awareness and inspire collective action to address the challenges. So I always think about, like, as a science fiction writer, sometimes I feel I was put on the stage in a very dramatic way. So people like in China, we hold on to some very pragmatic thinking. They think, oh, must be very useful, and you got to read it, you got to write it, you got to learn it. And they will think, okay, science fiction writers, they might have some kind of superpower to predict the future, just like the oracle, right? But I think the value, the importance of science fiction is way more than that. It's not always about predicting the future. And of course, it's part of its function. And it's not always about like precaution, like preventing the future, the bad, negative side of the future. But I think the value lies in between the science and the fiction, the punctuation, the tension, and the interconnectivity between the two. I think science fiction has this kind of very unique capacity to unlock your cognitive flexibility and fluidity, and it allows you to transcend yourself beyond the boundaries of past, present, and the future, even like ideologies, even like culture and language, even like human and the otherness. So I think this kind of very unique flow, it actually opened up a new potential of humanity. So basically what we're talking about, like a lot of technology today, and people are scared of technology, like such as ChatGPT, right? So people are talking about how they're gonna take over your job, how they're gonna become smarter and smarter, and someday it's gonna enslave us and maybe erase us, like the whole like species might gone overnight, extinction. But I have to say that this kind of fear and favor, like binary attitude, is always there. But as from Taoism, this is something we need to think beyond that. We have to think beyond the binary. we have to think beyond this kind of love or hate attitude. We have to engage with the technology. We have to co-evolve with it because, technology is like the interface and also human beings. So it's like two mirrors looking into each other. Through this kind of reflection, through this kind of recursion, we can actually see a clearer image of ourselves. And through this kind of endless reflection of the reality, actually we can have a better understanding of who we are and what kind of universe we're living in. And that's how we can better engage and interact with the nature as well. So I think all of this storytelling is actually leading us to a more sustainable and compassionate future. And this is what I'm hopeful and hope everyone can love to read, to imagine, and to create that kind of future you want to live in. So thank you. This is my sharing for today. Thank you all.
Thank you. So now let me reintroduce Dr. Shanahan. So once again, Dr. John Shanahan is an Associate Dean and Professor of English at DePaul University. His research interests include 17th and 18th century English literature, the history of science and technology, science fiction, and digital humanities. He contributed to the English translation of the Wandering Earth Film Production Handbook, a book-length account of China's highest-grossing sci-fi film, and has an article forthcoming on Liu Shixin's, am I saying it right? Slightly, more or less, sorry, award-winning sci-fi trilogy, The Three-Body Problem. And Dr. Tara Betts, would you mind coming up to the stage? Dr. Tara Betts is the author of Refuse to Disappear, Break the Habit, Arc and Hue. Her speculative fiction and sci-fi related writing has been published in Octavia's Brood, science fiction stories from social justice movements, Cicada, Luminescent Threads, and Midnight and Indigo, 22 speculative stories by Black women writers. She served as the inaugural poet for the People Practitioner Fellow at the University of Chicago. Dr. Betts currently teaches at DePaul University and serves as poetry editor for the Langston Hughes Review. She is also founder of the nonprofit organization, the Whirlwind Learning Center on Chicago's South Side. And now Dr. Betts and Dr. Shanahan will lead a conversation. Thank you.
Tara, would you like to begin, or do you want me to start?
Well, I will say this. I feel like you're probably more the science fiction expert than I am, and you're very familiar with Qiufan's work in a way that I'm not. I hope you'll share a little bit about that story of how you two met. But I'm kind of curious as a writer to another writer. You showed us all these photographs of the village that kind of inspired Waste Tide. I kind of am curious. Usually I find that a character starts talking, either to you or someone else, and it's like you're watching the scene unfold. So I'm wondering, was there a character that started talking to you and you knew this is the story after you've done all the research of the real life situation?
I have to admit that it's very short acquaintance with the people there because, the extreme environment, it's very stimulating. So I would say the kids will be the most shocking thing because, when we think about waste, it's almost like invisible in our daily life because you think you throw it in the trash tank is gonna be gone, right? So somebody's take care of it. But actually we didn't really think like somebody will suffer from taking care of the trash. And when you see it, when you feel it, when you smell it, and experienced like how those people, how like especially kids, they living in this kind of surroundings like on daily basis, and how this gonna change their physical health and even mental health, and even how the way they perceive and imagine the world. So this is totally astonishing. And I think at that moment, I think this is the story I gotta tell. And more people need to know about this place, not even in the real reference, but in the more fictional or science fiction or surreal transformation. But I have to deliver the message. Yeah.
The issue that comes to mind, and you know, both of your works as speculative fiction have to do this, which is, I guess, to use the famous phrase from Henry James about only connect. It's like, you know, the novels are particularly good at, but also short stories, if you do them well, show the way everything is linked to everything else, even if it's with a couple, you know, mediations. And we increasingly have to tell stories that way because, as you put it so well, I mean, throwing it away is only, you know, one step in multiple, and everything comes back and everything does connect. So I'm interested in either of you talking about stories that do that kind of storytelling. In other words, remembering what the economists call externalities and stuff. It's like, you know, you may think that your part of dealing with this object is this far, but it's actually, you know, this long from production to, you know, graveyard. And so I'd just like to hear, I know your examples in your fiction, and Tara, if you want to give examples in yours. And that's a storyteller's problem that I don't have firsthand experience with.
Well, since we've been talking, I thought we were going to talk more about world building in general too. I thought a lot about how Qiufan's stories are really trying to get us to recenter this value of not just the planet and its natural resources, but how does it impact us as human beings with these things that are really short term, right? And we're not thinking all the time about, we're thinking about consumption, we're thinking about convenience, we're thinking about the short term, right? So if you shift your values, that's a huge part of the world building. I know N.K. Jemisin, when she starts doing workshops with young people, science fiction writer, fantasy writer, she'll talk about, okay, what is the geography like? What is the weather like? And she'll just build with kids from that. But all of those things can start to impact the value system and what you choose to protect, what you love, what you kind of discriminate against, because we all do that on some level. Those kinds of things that we choose say so much. And I kept thinking, you know, even if I was looking at the environment when I was reading Qiufan's work, I thought a lot about Harriet Washington's book, A Terrible Thing to Waste, which is an account of the history of environmental racism in America. So it's not just not in my backyard here in America, it happens in poor communities, it happens in Black communities, it happens throughout the third world, as Qiufan pointed out. And I think that shows that we value certain communities more than others. Certain backyards are more precious than others, right? So if it comes up in the stories, I think it's a little bit less intimidating to people. It makes them feel not as like, oh my gosh, you know, it's a race thing, because we don't want to talk about that, right? That's not always the first thing we want to talk about. But it impacts where these things go, right? So for me, I liked that there were these myriad angles, that I could think about the climate, I could think about the people, I could think about who was on the margins. And a good story will do that. It'll make you think of all these levels. So it's kind of exciting.
Yeah, Qiufan, do you want to add to that? I guess the reason why I ask is because characters like Mimi, or characters, the worker in Fisher Li Jiang, who's, you know, off trying to relax, right, and being kind of suckered into this alternate reality and things like this. You have these characters who think that they're of a certain scope, like, and then their boundaries expand. And I guess that's partly what I'm interested in. You're very good at that, and I'd like maybe to hear a little more of how you think of a character and then show how that character has extra depths or extra dimensions that people, and even the character itself, doesn't at first understand.
I totally agree with what Tara just mentioned. There are so many different dimensions of world building, and what's beneath is the value system, and actually it's decisive, right? So if everything built up, we might think, okay, value system is metaphysics, is something up in the cloud, but actually it's not. When you experience all this culture in big tech companies, I'll say it's decisive. So it decides what kind of people you hire, what kind of like politics you create, and what kind of culture, what kind of product you can create. So basically you decide everything. So also like a society and a country as well. So to me, like I love to focus on those, like you mentioned, marginalized people and vulnerable group of people, and not only in waste type but also in the AI 2041. So actually each story tap into a very marginalized group of people, such as the untouchables in India. So yeah, back in the day when there's still caste system, the lowest class was called untouchable. But of course, the legal system changed and there's no caste system anymore. But on social interaction level, like in our language, in our like consumption, education, like job system is still there, right? The bias, the discrimination of the untouchables. So AI might amplify this kind of inequality by like collecting all this data and do the computation, like abstract modeling, and it becomes something even more toxic in the society. So I always try to like see how this kind of people on the age, they got triggered, they were pushed to the limit, and they were like the physical body, the mentality was like trapped in this kind of critical status, and something might happen. So something totally out of like expectation, right? So and also something might from a collective unconsciousness emerge from themselves. So they're basically like a medium, like carry on all this kind of symbolic or representation of the society, of history. It's almost like a trauma, right? So when you push someone to the edge, to the cliff, so something might happen. It's not only from him, from the individual, but from a group of people who suffer, who got damaged, who was sacrificed for such a long time. It's almost like I don't know how to say it, like a haunting ghost, like coming back to him. So it's something like that, because I think it's more mysterious way of like even when you're writing a sci-fi story, but there are so many mystical elements on that layer. So I think it's not only about science and technologies. It's about something human and something further, and even you can trace back to our ancestors.
I'm so glad you said that, because I always think about, people think science fiction is robots. And I think it's like, I love to think about mythology. I love to think about what are these things that live in our folk tales and live in our bodies and our histories. And it does the same thing that the robots can do. They just come up in unexpected ways. Like if you think about the history of genetics or you think about something like that, you can say, oh, what if somebody, came back as the story in Octavia's Brood I wrote, it was about shapeshifters. And I said, what if there was one community of people that still had the gene to become shapeshifters? And somehow there was a way to commodify that. And what would happen to those people if they could be commodified in a way where they would be overworked, right? And that was the question. I think a lot of stories come out. You said problems, I like to say questions. And then the writer is going to answer that question or think of what's the way to approach the problem. You may not solve it, but you'll approach it, right? Mm-hmm.
Speaking of shape shifters, as I remember, there's one novel from Stephen King, The Outsider. Yeah, that's about the shape shifter. But also you can think about in the AI age, why there is uncanny body effect. So you might see something very similar to human, but it's slightly different. You might feel that kind of eerie. You might feel that kind of uneasiness. I think it's maybe from that kind of like very ancient anxiety and a phobia about like someone seems pretty much like you, but it's not you. So it's like a shape shifter. So when we were tribes, we were living in the cave, and people might have this kind of communication from far away, but actually nobody knows each other. So it could be a myth, right? So this kind of subconsciousness inherited in our gene until now. And now the new other is AI. So right now you can see all this kind of virtual human. They can speak like you. They can have this kind of expression like you. But still there's something not right there. And you feel, oh, this is something very spooky. And it's chilling. Yeah, right. So I think there's something definitely there. You can trace back thousands of years ago.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm going to segue to a question I wanted to ask you about as someone who's tried writing with AI, and I wanted to ask you about these large language models that are in the news so much now. And I guess the question, and it's kind of open-ended, is I think you put it well, where in some sense it's functioning as a mirror to us of things that we may not want to acknowledge, because of course, as the computer scientists put it, garbage in, garbage out. It's like, all it does is parrot back to us all our prejudices in all of the written text that's ever been, on the internet. And so it's presenting us with a mirror where we have to deal with that uncanny other that's still us. That's one part of it. But I guess the other question is, and you were hinting at it a little bit, Qiufan, and that would be something like, do you think that true originality can come out of this? Or is it simply, parrots and mirrors, if you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I would say that if there's some real originality out of AI-generated content, it might be unrecognizable for human being. Yeah, that's the problem, right? So because I used to create my own model, my language model is preliminary back in the 2017. So I fed it with all my writing materials. So it's not that much. So it's kind of can generate some paragraphs, some sentences, but it's totally non-linear, non-coherent, not logical, so totally bullshitting all the time. So basically, I can only read it like poems. Like I have to build up the whole, I have to build up the context around it to make sense of it. But it's nothing to compare with what we're using right now, ChatGPT 3.5 or 4, and it's evolving like on daily basis. It's kind of fast. And yeah, I don't know, because right now we're fed it with natural language. But what if they figured out, okay, natural language of human being is lamb, right? We're gonna figure out some language more efficient, more profound, more sophisticated, then we can describe the very nature of the reality in a better way.
This is where, and maybe you saw the headline recently of, so apparently what they're trying to determine is correct, the first likely suicide by someone talking to a chatbot, like a GPT-4, you know, sort of back and forth and in Belgium, and, you know, whether this is really, you know, true or not. Regardless, I think, you know, the issue with, you put your finger on, which is something like, what would it mean to recognize originality in these new cases? And that is a tough question. And increasingly, because as you mentioned, we're training it on our own human natural language, but that's not always going to be so. And increasingly, things are being fed its own synthetic data to do things. So AlphaZero got so good at Go, apparently, and what has really, you know, bugged out and fascinated the programmers is that it was making its own data. It's like, you know, it was given the rules of the game, but not the millions of past games. So what it could train itself on was its own synthetic data, never synthesized by humans. That's different, you know what I mean? So the problem of synthetic data and what that might mean for true originality, that's where the leap might happen that we, you know, and again, I don't buy into the kind of singularity type stuff, but these are interesting dilemmas because it does present something that humans have not encountered much yet, which is, you know, different forms of whatever you want to call it, problem-solving intelligence that we know only from animal cognition so far and, you know, primitive computing. That's not a question, I guess. I have one other big question, but Tara, I've talked too much. Go ahead.
I'm just kind of curious. I mean, because now everybody is talking about ChatGPT because it's starting to, you know, at first it couldn't write anything. Now it's like writing whole papers and legal briefs and a period that's very, very small to learn it. But I think the fundamental thing that people keep missing, and I'm really curious what you think, because you're obviously using it to think about your work in different ways. But I'm really curious, are people really paying attention to the fact that the algorithm is only as good as the information that you feed it? You know, like I think about the documentary Coded Bias, or I think about, I don't remember the author, but the book is called Weapons of Math Destruction. Yeah, Kathy O'Neill's book. And in doing so, it's like they're showing how there are problems in the algorithm. Like, for example, one of the things that came up was there was one community, the algorithm was putting people back in jail even though they had already been on probation, right? And they met all the qualifications to be released from probation. And they would say, oh, this algorithm said you broke this code or something. So they discovered that they were incarcerating people who did not need to be incarcerated based on the algorithm. And I think that's the thing where our humanity needs to come into play. Like, that's another reason why we need the stories. Yeah, we could have a machine probably write an amazing story, a serviceable story, a story that might teach us something. But what is the information that's been fed into the algorithm to create that story? And does it include all the possibilities? Which is like, how can you even do that, right? So, I mean, I'm kind of skeptical about algorithms for that reason, but I think it's interesting at the same time. And I'm wondering, I mean, do you feel like there's some ethical things with the things that—
For sure, yeah, there's a lot of problems created by algorithms. And one thing very interesting, recently, I met several editors from sci-fi magazines here and in China. So they receive like tons of fiction stories generated or co-generated with ChatGPT. And it became overwhelming, for the human labor. They have to, detect everyone, because it's too many. And even they need some filters, There's one called GPT-0. You can automatically detect an article and tell you immediately, if it's written by ChatGPT. But they just shut down the submission portal, they just reject everything because it's overwhelming. And I think, yeah, of course, and they did some tricks in their guidelines of submission, and they put some invisible characters, words, codes in there. And if those, fakers, they fed the model with these guidelines, and the invisible ones got revealed and got amplified. For example, zombie, they hide it in the guideline and come up with all these zombie stories coming to them, and they know, oh, this is fakers, and this is almost hilarious. So I think this is really happening, and people cheating in a very lazy way. So I think this is not smart to using AI. I think one good thing about AI is always like a mirror. It helps you to see your own limitation, and it pushes you to think out of your limitation, think out of the box, and it makes you better if you use it in a smarter way. So I think this is so-called co-evolution, not just simply copy and paste and submit it under your name. So I think that's totally a waste of time. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Stanley, for the presentation and for being here and for the organizers and panelists. So I'm in the business school here at DePaul, and we're having a lot of conversations about AI, technology, climate change. And you mentioned this binary thinking of some people love it, some people hate it. And you also mentioned the need for newer political systems as this evolves. And one of the other binary discussions is often capitalism versus socialism, free market versus central planning, and people have very strong feelings, and you could also say US and China taking very different approaches. And I'm curious, as you look to the future, having become very familiar with, I think, free market systems, but also grown up in one of the more centralized systems, which of these different approaches do you think is going to be better prepared for these evolutions? And it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle, and I'm just curious if you have any thoughts.
I think it's a billion-dollar question. So I don't think either of the two systems works perfectly. Yeah, because we all see this faultness and disadvantage of each side. And I think the problem is even worse when they try to isolate each other and disconnected with each other. So I think the value is always in between the connectivity. So I think it's not either or, but it's kind of like quantum physics, like superpositioning. It's overlapping. It's kind of new level of dynamic exchange. So I couldn't say what kind of new political system that will be, but definitely not what we are having right now. So maybe AI could design something better. I don't know. Yeah, that's my imagination. Maybe in the future there's a AI governance society, and it might help us to think beyond the binary. But I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not, because maybe you become something almost like a 1984 plus Brave New World plus Handmaid's Tale, right? So it's all depends on human agency, how we recognize the urgentness of making change and how flexible we try to like break through all this kind of binary and ideology differences to make it work together, like collaboration. I think is the most important thing to me. Yeah, dialogue, conversation, connectivity. So this is would be my answer. So thank you.
I guess to maybe return to literature a little bit, I actually want to ask about, I guess, how you think about temporality and I guess temporality and race specifically. I mean, I guess Tara, you've brought up the idea of like environmental racism multiple times, and I guess like related to kind of environmental racism is technological racism, and I mean the sort of like classic, I think like techno-orientalist kind of paradigm critique. We would kind of think about, I guess, how in the history of speculative fiction, Asians, Chinese bodies are often, often both hyper-modern, linked to, I guess, technology, automation, kind of abstraction. The sort of like robot and cyborg figure in like Japanese animation, but also is like a figure of labor as well. And on the other hand, there's always something, I guess, pre-modern, like mythical. And I kind of see, I've only read Waste Tide, but I kind of see both temporalities at play in your work. With like Mimi, but also with the kind of locality of Chaoshan and the kind of kinship networks and the sort of like mysticism that you evoke in this space. And it kind of has its own mythology in kind of Cantonese culture and like Chinese culture. So I guess like I'm just curious how you kind of relate to these like kind of racial histories of speculation and the time the time in which like they have taken place and and the present in which you're doing I guess these speculations.
Thank you. Yeah, I think why I put all this kind of like mythology mystical, superstitious together with technology, because that's my personal experience since I was born. So because the city I was born is one of the first 4 economic special zones after reform and reopening after 1978. So actually we experienced a sudden blossom of all these kind of new things from the West. So not all of those products getting legally, most of them like smuggling. And we got all these kind of new electronic products, but also the cultural products, such as Hollywood movies, Japanese manga and animations. But simultaneously, I experienced all this kind of like rural China, folklores, shamanic rituals, superstitious ghost story was told by from my grandma. So everything, even my grandma, she can actually see ghosts. Yeah, since she's through her whole life. So that's something captivated me for such a long time. So I think maybe there's so many similarities between science and technology with mythology. So I think they're sharing the same cognitive framework. They are all trying to explain how the world functions, how the reality fit in our perception and everything. So I think this is something always like fascinating me, and I want to put them together and see how they work. And always there's some new perspective emerge from this kind of collision. And I think that's the most interesting part. Even like science fiction is totally westernized invention imported to China only 100 years ago, but still with this flexibility, and it can invite so many different elements, like culturally, historically, and geopolitically, into its framework. It's like a rebirth. Yeah, so I think this is something I was still doing that. I'm writing my next book. It's like a sequel to Waste Tide. So it's talking about the oceanic environmental issue, and also talking about indigenous people, islanders, because I love islands. I live on island. I travel to island. I always am an islander. So yeah, right now, and of course because a lot of things happen right now, like the High Sea Treaty just got passed, right, couple of weeks ago. Yeah, so that's very crucial to me, and I think that might change a lot of things about climate change in the future. Yeah, of course, and yeah, so that's my current project right now. Thank you.
Well, you're always ahead of me. I was about to ask, that was my next question, was what's next for you? So that's great. I'm really happy to hear there's a sequel to Waste Tide. And I really want to thank everyone for coming. It's really been an honor to have you here at DePaul, taking some extra time, and to have you in the States, and to come and tell us about what you're working on and your thoughts. So thank you very much, Mr. Chen.
Thank you so much. It's such a privilege to witness this fascinating conversation, and it's very much pertinent to our everyday life. So before closing, let me make a couple of announcements about the DePaul Humanities Center's future events. Wednesday, May 10th, we are having 3 guests via Zoom for the AAPI Heritage Month event, themed on environment. And one of them is definitely talking about nuclear waste, meaning the Japanese government is releasing nuclear contaminated water into the Pacific Ocean. The speakers are Catherine Elias of Chicago Asian Americans for Environmental Justice, Los Angeles-based activist Tsukuru Force, former representative of the Northern Mariana Islands at Large Congressional District, Sheila Jack Babauta. Next fall, we will have a photo exhibition at the Art Gallery, the photos of Minamata, Japan, where methyl mercury poisoning destroyed the environment and people's livelihood and their lives. Those photos were taken by photojournalists Eugene Smith and Eileen Miyoko Smith. I wonder if you have seen the film, which came out in 2020, and Johnny Depp played Eugene Smith. But we will bring Eileen from Japan, who has been a long-standing activist in Kyoto, to DePaul. Please check our website and join our email list by scanning the QR code on the screen in the lobby. And today's event cannot be made possible without the dedication of Dr. Anna Clisol. Is she there? Oh, right there. The Associate Director of the DePaul Humanities Center, Dr. Li Jin, the Director of Chinese Studies Program and Global Asian Studies, Dr. Philip Stanley of Political Science Department and Endowed Professor in Environmental Diplomacy in the Grade School of Applied Diplomacy. My appreciation also goes to the students, Emily Figueroa and Parveen Mundi, from the Humanities X class, team taught by Drs. Jin and Sally. Our videographer is Isai Medina. Thank you as always. Lastly and least importantly, once again, please express our gratitude to our interlocutors and the special guest, Drs. Shanahan Betts and Mr. Chen. Thank you very much. And I think some food is out there in the lounge area. Please take time and spend some time there, and have a good night.